All right, so I will go up to join our friends at the front. And again, I think this truly is meant to be like an informal and a conversation that involves all of us. So if at any point anyone has a question, just jump in. If you have a new thought, interrupt, kindly, but truly. So let's just start off by saying, hello, Nick, Marta, and Alex. Thank you for being here. Can each of you just introduce yourselves, where you were born, where you live right now, are you studying, your involvement in the Ukrainian community in your childhood, and now as you are becoming adults too. Take it away, Alex.
Great. All right, well, hi everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a native Torontonian, but both of my parents immigrated from Ukraine in the mid-90s. I've been involved with the Ukrainian schools, the Ukrainian Scouting Organization for a while. I've also been involved musically, I've been sharing Ukrainian music quite a lot. And now with the recent events of the war, I think I speak for all of us when I say that we've been involved hands-on, completely volunteering, organizing all kinds of online Zoom, what are they called, seminars. And yeah, we've been really trying to rally up the Ukrainian community in Canada, and not just the Ukrainians. As you can see, we're here joined by our other Eastern European friends, so that's what we've been working to strive for.
Okay, so my name is Marta. I think Alex left out the fact that we are all in first year university at U of T. All of us are studying political science. My parents both immigrated also from Ukraine in the year 2000 from Western Ukraine. Since childhood, the first language that I learned was Ukrainian. You could have asked me where I lived and I probably would have told you Ukraine, There wasn't really, it was in Canada, it was just like in my house, like a regular Ukrainian, Ukrainian home. I recall, I don't even know how old I was, maybe I wasn't even a year old, during the Orange Revolution. My parents had a Ukrainian channel on our TV and it was live streaming, or just, showcasing everything that was going on, and I would walk around the house and chant, Yushchenko, Yushchenko. So I guess just from birth, I've been involved in Ukrainian politics, if you could say that, in Ukrainian activities. I was in a Ukrainian dance troupe up until a few years ago, like Alex said, in scouting organizations, and now, it's our turn to, I guess, lead the way in Canada to talk about Ukraine and that it's a sovereign nation, it's not part of Russia. Yeah.
Okay, on to me. Hi everyone, and thank you for having all of us. My name is Nick. I'm a grandson of Ukrainian refugees fleeing oppressive Soviet and fascist regimes in Europe. And their experiences really shaped how they brought up my parents, and then how I was brought up in a Ukrainian environment where culture and traditions and heritage was paramount. And it's, despite me being different from Alex and Marta, and that my grandparents are the ones that came from Ukraine and my parents are born here, that Ukraine and my Ukrainian identity is really a formative part of who I am. And in terms of what I've done in the Ukrainian community, very similar to Alex and Marta, I've been in a Ukrainian scouting organization, Ukrainian heritage language schools, and just various different Ukrainian organizations throughout Toronto.
So I'll just add a new question to this point. Can one of you maybe describe the Ukrainian community here in Toronto, or where you respectively grew up? Like, how many people would you say there are? Is it like you'd walk into a room and you know every single person there, or a little bit larger than that? When you say, talk about maybe your experiences in your scouting organizations, your folk dancing groups, your musical groups.
Okay, well, I would say that the Ukrainian Canadian Toronto community specifically, it's much larger than people imagine. In terms of people that are active, there's all kinds of different groups that aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily come together all the time. But, outside of just active Ukrainian groups like scouting organizations and folk dancing, driving in Toronto, in the past 2 weeks, I think I can guarantee that I'll see maybe at least 5 or 6 cars with the Ukrainian flag on them. I'll drive past 2 or 3 houses that have these big Ukrainian flags. And these aren't people that we see all the time or ever, you know. I don't know most of these people. But the Ukrainian community here is huge, you know, and in Canada because of, you know, how much Ukraine formed, you know, settlements in Canada after the World Wars. So, there's a lot of different Toronto Ukrainian schools. My mom is the principal of one of them. Unfortunately, during COVID, attendance dropped a lot because, you know, it was really hard to transition from that to online. But previous to COVID, I would say the one specific school that my mom is a principal of, there were,
Which we all went to, actually. We're all students there.
Yeah, we did. I would say maybe like 300 kids.
How many schools are there? 4.
There's 4. So
Right.
some of them, they
4
vary.
major ones and a lot of actually smaller ones too, so.
Yeah.
Newer ones.
Talk about the youth group, because I live with 26 like youth associations in Canada that filter into the.
At least in the GTA, maybe more in Canada, but in the GTA, I think that's.
Youth associations, I mean, it's like different parts of life. I mean, there's not just like just a Ukrainian community group. It's like, you know, scouting, dancing, music. I can't even name all of them. So yeah, it's exactly. You can go
And
on
religion
and on.
too, church communities as well.
Church
Yeah.
communities, yeah.
Just for context, why we all went, wow, like our Latvian school here, I mean, maybe someone knows better, like 30 or 40 kids maybe in Toronto, which is pretty good for these days. Maybe 60, okay, good. Pre-COVID, yeah.
The 300 was for one school, so I can't speak for the rest of the schools.
Wow.
If I could add something. I just wanted to bring this up. Since the Ukrainian community is so varied, you know, we have, I think, 4 main waves of migration. We had people that came here all the way back at the turn of the century. We had people who came here during the war. We had people who came here after the war. We had people who came here in the 90s, like my parents. And we have people who are coming here now. There's a really big divide. A lot of organizations are, you know, specifically kind of pointing towards people whose parents moved here. And there's a lot of organizations that, you know, even before 2014 and kind of when things started to get tense in Ukraine, there'd be a lot of differences. You'd never really see that much mixture between people whose parents were born here, whose grandparents were born here, and the people who maybe moved here themselves or the people whose parents moved here. And now, I think Nick and Marta will agree with me on this 100%. Now, it doesn't matter when you came here, you know, it doesn't matter what part of Ukraine your parents are from. You're Ukrainian, you're part of our community, and that's just been so pleasing to see in these last years, people coming together. No matter where you're from, when you came here, you're Ukrainian, you're with us.
And then on that point, sort of, I think we all see the parallels, although the scale is much different, clearly, with the Ukrainian community, and if Ukraine as a country with its population, with Latvia having 1.9 million, a little bit different. But so we've kind of grown up hearing a lot of like stereotypes or just total misconceptions about Latvia. Like most people might say Latvia, like, what is that? And especially when we were younger, I think a lot of us were the only way that our friends and people, you know, our peers even knew that our country existed. But on that note, what's been your experience with Canadians reacting to, say, you know, hearing when you're Ukrainian? And not just like in these past months, but more, you know, growing up. Are there any total misconceptions or any kind of rude things that you hear on the regular because people just don't know much about your country?
Go ahead, Marta.
I cannot count them all on my fingers because it's like prior to the war, at least people were less afraid of being insensitive or just, you know, not even filtering their thoughts, just saying whatever comes to mind. Most notably, I've been asked if Ukraine is the country where all the mail order brides come from. That's, I didn't even know what to say to that. I have, you know, like you said, even with the massive community in Canada and Toronto especially, I would say that I was Ukrainian. People would say, oh, where is that? Oh, beside Russia? Okay, so are you Russian? Do you speak Russian? I said, no, I speak Ukrainian. I'm Ukrainian. I'm from Ukraine, you know, not from there, but I was born here, but still. And they don't all come to mind, but I recall one experience in high school. It was grade 10 or grade 11. I was sitting in a biology class, probably 2 feet away from our teacher. We were just having like a break, I was mingling, and this was around the time that we have this Holodomor presentation about the Ukrainian genocide in 1932. And there's this bus that comes around with like TV screens, and it's a documentary, it's really great and very educational, but so that bus came to our school. And I turned around to my friend and I asked if she went on that bus today. And then this other guy next to me, he says, just flat out, he says, you know the Holodomor was made up, right? And I thought, this isn't happening in school, in front of a teacher, in the year was, I don't know what, 2019. I was baffled, and we engaged in like a 30-minute argument, and he was telling me that the Holodomor was Nazi propaganda against, sorry, I'm mixing it up, German propaganda against the Soviets, and that all the evidence was fabricated. And I asked him what I should tell to, I guess, my ancestors, who I will meet one day. Should I ask them if they lied to us? Should I ask them that their death was fake or fabricated or just propaganda? And that experience is stuck in my mind because this isn't 1932, this isn't 1940 or 50 or 60. We have hard evidence, we have eyewitness experiences, we have documents from the Soviet era, their own documents that say that this happened and how they covered it up. And it still happens. So I think probably Nick has some other experiences, but that one was probably the most like disgusting and baffling one.
Yeah, that was a really insightful commentary into what a lot of people think about in terms of the Holodomor, kind of a topic that really shouldn't be divisive and there really shouldn't be different camps about, but unfortunately there are. In terms of experiences that I faced, I guess facing a lot of different stereotypes about Ukraine. Obviously, the main one being Ukraine is near Russia, so that it's very similar and almost identical, which obviously is very, very untrue and couldn't be farther from the truth. One particular case that I remember in high school, not too long ago actually, during COVID times, I think in just the past year, where we were talking about some topics, and a discussion came about the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, and I was talking about Kyiv and referencing it with the proper Ukrainian pronunciation, and there somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, I don't really know what you're talking about. Don't you mean Kiev? Which is the Russian colonial pronunciation of our capital?" And I said, "No, that's the incorrect pronunciation. That person wouldn't accept that." That the Ukrainian pronunciation is the pronunciation of the capital of Ukraine. So that's just one example that I thought of, but yeah, so maybe on to Alex now.
My experiences are pretty similar. One thing I can remember is, way back when, I remember I was in some kind of summer camp or something, and there was this one Russian kid who, he was a nice guy. I got along with him and everything. I couldn't really hold anything against him then. And one day I remember out of the blue, he referred to me by the Russian, derogatory slur for Ukrainians, which is khokhol, which, kind of means like dirt farmer. And he started telling me how Russian Ukrainian is the same language, and I said, well, really? I started speaking to him in Ukrainian, and I remember specifically his face. He looked at me. He was like, "Are you making this up? Like, are these words that you've just come up with?" And no, that's our language. And really, like Russian and Ukrainian, while the grammatical structure, I don't want to get into linguistics, but while it's similar, if like a Russian listens to Ukrainian, they don't know what we're talking about whatsoever.
And vice versa, for somebody who doesn't have a lot of exposure.
And vice versa, yeah.
So.
If you didn't grow up speaking Russian or you didn't grow up hearing Russian as a Ukrainian, you would never understand Russian. And that just goes to show how different our cultures are. And at least I hope I changed his opinion about Ukraine from that day forward. But that's a very similar experience with a lot of people. That Ukraine, Russia, neighbors, they're the same, like Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians. Your cultures are nothing at all like Russia's. You share a border, doesn't mean you're the same country. It's the same with us. So hopefully people learn, and I'm sure they are now.
With that said, I sort of want to turn the conversation more towards the last few years. And can you maybe start from 2014? And you were, 12 years old, maybe a little bit younger than that at the time, but do you remember when Russia did invade Crimea? Do you remember what your families were talking about in your communities, and how has it been over these past, I'm like doing math in my head, over these past 8 years, truly, as this has unfolded and then also come to this point today?
Well, I guess I'll begin. The last 3 weeks have been, a facsimile of what was in 2014. I remember, like today, my dad streaming some kind of Ukrainian news service and pacing in front of the TV, calling relatives in Ukraine, figuring out things, just a whole lot of commotion going on, really. And I remember in 2014 when things started, we were surprised that so many people came up and stood up for Ukraine in the capital, because Ukraine is historically an incredibly divided country. I mean, you've had Russian colonialists who have been, I hate to be vulgar, but rape our culture for the last 300 years, and it's a little bit unexpected when you have thousands of people stand up all of a sudden and say, all right, this ends today, we're making our voice heard and we're moving forward, and it makes you proud. It's a shame that we had to have 100 people die in 2014 and thousands in the last 3 weeks. That's just tragic. But I'm sure all Ukrainians agree with me that blood is the price we pay for freedom, like what we had in Lithuania and the documentary and in Latvia. If you don't stand up and you don't, as we say in our Ukrainian anthem, the word is, we will lay down our soul and our body for our freedom, and that's what we're doing now. Oh, there's a question. Ah.
Chose him. His name is Witowych, and he made the film about the Ukrainian famine with the National Film Board a long time ago. And I chose him because I thought he will understand. He will get it. Because your editor is your documentary. So there's a Ukrainian connection to that film.
No, yeah, that's a good point. We've, and it's important to remember that 1991 is not the beginning of Ukrainian history whatsoever. I mean, we declared a republic in 1918. Before that, Ukraine was, all the way back in the 1500s, and before that, we had our own government and militia. And I don't want to get into history because I could take up all day with that, but Ukraine's history is long and important and
very interesting, with a
very
lot of very interesting people there.
Yeah, so. Incredibly, yeah, the amount of characters that come up and all the different political factions. I mean, it's incredibly fascinating. No one knows it in Canada, at least, but we Ukrainians do. But going back to Liva's question, the thing to remember is 2014 was the beginning of an armed conflict in Ukraine, and 2022 is just a continuation. I mean, we had people dying in eastern Ukraine in 2020, January, February, like the beginning of February. I think February 4th was the last soldier that was killed in Donetsk before Russia began a full-on invasion. So we've had a war going on for all these 8 years. I mean, Ukrainian news, every week on Friday, they have like a minute of silence for everyone that died. They list all the names every week for the last 8 years. So this has been going on for a very long time, and it's a shame to say this, but I'm used to what's happened now. Ukraine, maybe not the West and the center, hasn't been war-torn, but the East has seen continuous fighting, tragically.
Yeah, I recall in 2014, my parents, they're very loyal to one Ukrainian channel called Espresso TV. And I recall that day.
Me? Because I have the same story at home.
It's just no reason that they're loyal. They just really like it.
For context for a little bit, this is a channel that was created. Thank you. This was a channel that was created during the 2014 uprising. There were 2 channels, and they were just like haphazard. I remember like the first streams. I don't know if you remember this. I remember this specifically. The first streams that they had, they were sitting in someone's house, with just computers going, cameras, papers all over the place. Because the mainstream media didn't really want to cover the protests in 2014. They were afraid that the protests would be subsided, and then when the political regime would come back to power, they'd want to be on their good side to make sure that they wouldn't get into trouble, that they wouldn't be taken off the air. And so the first kind of separate independent media that we had, and now they've become, full-on TV channels. But I remember in those days, like Marta said, it would just be like 2 guys, with their computers, Twitter feeds open, papers everywhere. They'd be sitting at home, broadcasting news, and those were like the early days of Ukrainian independent media. So yeah.
Yeah, you just basically said what I was going to say. But I recall those days, and even before that, when it was declared that Ukraine would not be joining the EU, I remember my parents, they got a call from, I don't remember which relative it was, but they told us that news. And I was kind of too young to process exactly what that meant for Ukraine, but I could see the look on my parents' faces, how worried they were, because they lived through the Soviet Union. They know what kind of regimes have been put into Ukraine, the kind of puppets that they put into the government, which Yanukovych was one of them. But after that, I mean, just hearing week after week new news, Crimea has been annexed. The Euromaidan has, turned into a very violent, very bloody war that was supposed to be a student protest against a very, very undemocratic regime. And that was when I was 11 years old. So, I knew what was happening and I was worried, but I still didn't fully understand what this meant for Ukraine. And like Alex said, I mean, I've just kind of become desensitized to it also. It doesn't surprise me. It devastates me, but it doesn't surprise me anymore what Putin has been up to in the Kremlin. One thing that I do want to note, though, that in 2014, I don't remember exactly where the rally was, but there was a rally in downtown.
In front of the Russian consulate.
In front of the Russian consulate, yeah. And from my memory, there were probably like 50 people maximum, me and my parents included. And now you see, in Nathan Phillips Square, they said a number was like 30,000 people. That's like incomprehensible to me. For number one, for people to even know, that many people to know what Ukraine is, and that we're not Russians, we are Ukrainians. And number two, to actually stand with us and go out in the snow for hours and protest with us. People of all kinds of nationalities, Azerbaijanis, people from Belarus, from Canada, We've even seen people from Russia who tell us, how much they oppose their regime. So it's really encouraging to see how much support there is nowadays. I think before 2014, the saying was that it's not 1932 anymore, and now the saying is it's not 2014 anymore, because every single time we've gotten more support, which is really, really encouraging.
Yeah, that was really good insight into that. I'd like to offer two different forms of insight. One of kind of my own look as to my family's reaction to 2014, and also a bit into what it kind of felt like being a Ukrainian Canadian in the years after 2014. So when the war was still going on, but nobody, apart from the Ukrainian community, really knew. So first off, about my family in 2014, something that I remember quite fondly was my grandfather was still alive at the time, and he was 91. And this 91, he was 91 years old, and he asked me to teach him how to use an iPad so that he could follow the news from Ukraine. And I spent, quite a lot of time, teaching him how, about how to connect to the internet and all the good sites to use. And I remember just how determined he was to access those sites, and how determined he was to learn, at 91, just to be able to get that news from Ukraine. So that I wanted to offer that about 2014. And the period after 2014, being Ukrainian Canadian, I have to say it almost was kind of like living in two worlds at that time, because going to Ukrainian school on Saturdays, we'd get, our teachers who were well connected with the community and with news. We would get updates from the front. We often had soldiers come from the front and give presentations to us, soldiers who had been wounded and injured and telling their stories. And then you'd go out, to listen to the media, listen to our non-Ukrainian friends who'd really forgotten about what happened in 2014, and not that they didn't care, but there was really nowhere for them really to learn about what was going on in the English language, because really after they had Putin's annexation of Crimea, and after the initial invasion of the Donbass region, the Western media really stopped focusing on the war in Ukraine and turned to other issues. So it really was like living in a dual world, one where you see this war, you see the veterans, you see the wounded, and the other one where it was almost like it wasn't happening.
So on that note, you mentioned your non-Ukrainian friends and your Canadian friends, and I think in my mind I'm separating, what Ukrainians are feeling right now, just truly like unimaginable, I think, for us. And then for many of us here, like the war has been the top thing on our minds over these past few weeks. And then you still go on Instagram and people are, totally moved on, totally in their own world. And I know it's about information bubbles, but can you share any conversations you've had with, your Canadian friends at school or, people outside of the Ukrainian community? How has that been, or how are they feeling?
I can say I remember in high school, because I went to a Ukrainian elementary school, so there wasn't really anybody that I needed to share the culture with because we all had the same culture. But in high school, I think my friend group that I sat with at lunch, we talked about random things, and then oftentimes it would kind of go into our different cultures. So one of our friends was half Cuban. She would tell us about a lot of her, her Cuban side. And I tried as much as I possibly could to tell them, number one, that Ukraine existed, number two, some of the history, because obviously nobody wants to listen to a history lesson at lunch. Yeah, of course, Alex does, but I hope, because I haven't spoken to these friends in quite a long time, but I really hope that whatever I told them has somewhat stuck with them. Actually, one of my friends now, she does sort of ask me how to fundraise, how to help. So I can say that I'm glad that at least one person now is aware of what's going on. Usually the conversations, they entered a sort of like joking type of theme. And I can see that now a lot on social media as well. So initially there was like so much concern. It was like, oh my God, Russia just invaded Ukraine. They're bombing the capital. And now on Instagram, all I see is like memes about being drafted for World War III. And I'm thinking, who told you that, number one, you're going to be drafted? Number two, World War III is about to happen. Like, if you spent half as much time worrying about yourself being drafted, then, thinking about the fact that Ukraine is being threatened as a sovereign nation, a lot would be different right now. So I think it's important now not to shift into this humorous kind of discourse about Ukraine. A lot of Ukrainians cope with humor, but that's because, our country is being bombed. Not Canada, not America. That's mostly the countries that I've seen joking about it, but the way that we have the conversation, I think, is really important.
Something I'd like to add on to my previous point about how people looked at Ukraine in the years after 2014, and something that I experienced in terms of my non-Ukrainian friend group was that it related to that whole piece that I mentioned about how a lot of people almost didn't want to recognize the fact that the war was still going on since beginning in 2014 and going on. And whenever that topic would come up among my friends, I'd always make sure to mention, no, there's still a war there, and people are reporting on it. And even up until I remember going to some family friends that we haven't seen in a while, just this past November, and mentioning that same thing. Oh yeah, I said he was Ukrainian. Okay, yeah, what's going on in Ukraine now? And I said there's a war going on. And at that point, and at other points in the past, the people that I've told that there's a war still going on since 2014, they've given me this kind of look, almost like I was kind of giving fake news. That I've never seen it on CNN. I don't see it on any of the, the news that I watch. So how could that be true? It seems like some kind of, this Ukrainian is wrapped up in his own nationalism and is like, making up or embellishing on some kind of facts, and that, yeah, okay, I'll listen to him and we're going to change the topic. So that is my experiences from that.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Nick's point. I mean, all through high school, I was a very, very patriotic Ukrainian. All my friends. I was lucky to have a friend group where basically everyone was from Eastern Europe. My friends were Polish, Albanian, Romanian, Hungarian. So with them, it was really easy because all of our cultures had similar pasts. We've all had our national struggles, and they were always interested to hear what I had to say about Ukraine. A lot of them were interested about learning Ukrainian culture. I was interested in their cultures. Really nice to have a beautiful exchange of cultures. We have that in common. We do this too. We do this differently. So that kind of discourse, I think, is incredibly healthy and has been very good in Canada in the last few years. We've seen a lot of different cultures coming together and working. But one thing that 2014 has done to me, and I'm sure Nick and Marta also, is I'm never apologetic about being Ukrainian or being proud of who I am. I remember one time in high school I was saying something about Ukraine or something, and this one girl said, "Oh, why do you always have to talk about Ukraine so much? Like, we're in Canada. We should be talking about Canada." And then I kind of just swallowed it because I didn't want to move on. But now, especially with this war, you can never be ashamed and you can never stand down from who you are. And this goes to, I guess, every single, Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian living in Canada. Don't let anyone ever tell you that, your culture should be subdued because you're living in Canada. There's nothing wrong with being incredibly proud of who you are and where you come from. There's nothing wrong with being a nationalist. There's been a lot of, discourse about how, nationalism is, teetering towards far right. Being far right, that's one thing. I don't want to get into that thing. But there's nothing wrong with being proud of who you are. There's nothing wrong with being proud of who your parents are. And, as we say in Ukrainian, you can change anything except your blood. So I think that's very important to live by. You should be proud of who you are, and you need to stick with your blood.
And I just really quickly want to add that a lot of people that are talking about Ukrainian nationalism and, Ukrainians believing that they have the right to have their own sovereign nation, they don't understand the different cultural context for Ukrainians, being nationalists. It's not like some random person on 4chan who is, accidentally gotten into the neo-Nazi group that calls himself a nationalist. It's a really different context that you really can't fully understand unless you are a Ukrainian or a Lithuanian or Latvian or just Eastern European who struggled to break away from, either Soviet rule or another empire. So that's really important to note.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, as a side note, Ukrainian nationalism is not like Russian nationalism, because Russian nationalism is about, being on top of your enemy and, conquering them. Ukrainian nationalism is all about survival. Like, you look at our folk songs, you look at all of our heroes, all we've been asking for these past hundreds of years is simply for our survival. So it's a little bit hard to classify us with certain other groups.
All right, so I think I want to turn the conversation a little bit to the best ways that we can support you and the best ways that, from Canada, which seems like so far away, we can do our part to fight against the war in Ukraine. And I'll start by saying, like, our LNJAK, our organization, I think we've been trying to put our response into 3 categories, which is just money, plain and simple, like donations. And we're specifically donating to the Ukrainian humanitarian appeal through the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. The second being, protests, like going physically, like showing visually that you are there in support, showing by the number of people, contributing to those 30,000 people to make sure that regular Canadians don't just forget about this and don't just move on while there's still a war happening. And then the third is really education. And this session comes into that, really both for everyone here, for people on Zoom, just to keep this story going, to keep learning more about Ukraine. Our event with Minister Bill Blair a couple of weeks ago also fit into that category, but it also doesn't feel like enough. And I don't know what the answer is, but can you just share, what can we do? What can we really do that supports you as individuals, as our friends who are going through something horrific, and as Ukrainians as a whole nation?
Exactly that. Like everything that you just said, that perfectly encompasses what I think everybody should be doing, not just our, European friends that know what we have faced. I want to add that my cousin on the front, Nestor, one of the times that we talked to him in the past 3 weeks, he relayed to us that soldiers there know about the rallies, especially the really big ones, like the ones in Berlin, but also the ones in Toronto. And he told us specifically to keep going to those, to keep making them bigger and bigger, because those massively boost morale of soldiers. Because now, like I said, probably 5 times so far, that the people know the world is watching. Ukrainian soldiers aren't alone, Ukrainian people aren't alone, the country is not alone. So these protests and rallies are, spiritually and like psychologically so important. And of course, like you said, money. The Ukrainian military, of course, needs money to keep going, to keep fighting. But also there's a lot of the territorial defense units that are lacking a lot of weapons. And those ones are really important to defend places outside of, the Eastern Front, because they are also being bombed, more so than the Eastern Front, because Russia is really dropping bombs on civilian cities and villages. But everything that you've just said, that's perfectly encompasses it in my eyes.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I think informing people about what's actually happening in Ukraine is very crucial, because the Russian propaganda machine and misinformation machine is incredibly skilled, incredibly strong. Thank God YouTube, I think 2 days ago, took down all Russian state-funded channels, which is amazing, because I told this earlier, if you'd watch those channels for 5 minutes, you'd be fully convinced that Putin is fighting a war in a good name. You'd be completely convinced that Ukrainians are fascists and that all we want to do is kill poor Russians. So thank God that misinformation is out of the way. But as Marta said, a big way to help Ukraine, if you want to see Ukraine as a nation in the next 10 years, well, actually more like in the next few months, you have to donate to the military, because that's the first front. Those are the first people who are responding to fire. These are the first people who are protecting civilians, and so it's important that we give them support.
Yeah, I think Alex and Marta both really well, and Leva as well, talked about the donation aspect. I'd just like to talk a little bit more about the aspect relating to Russian propaganda, in that some way that all of you can help with that is to recognize where that is prevalent, and recognize that a lot of the people, that if you speak about Ukraine and about Eastern Europe and those people that don't really have like a supportive point of view, that they've really been impacted by Russian propaganda and by that. So recognizing that that's there, and whenever you can, just to try and educate about the truth, because I think my mom shared a quote with me that Ukraine right now is fighting for truth. It's fighting for what actually is happening there, and wanting to spread that truth and spread the values of independent nations, and people who want to be independent can be, and of democracy and of justice and all of that. So that really is something that I'd like to add. And of course, doing what we're doing right now, what the Lithuanians and Latvians and Estonians and so many other cultures have been doing with us for this past 3 weeks is paramount, as you all said. And just to continue that, and just to finish off, I'd like to say it really has been a blessing, and it's almost like it was fate kind of brought us together at that first rally. So, and it was really meant to be. So I'd like to thank all of you for that.
I have a comment and a question. And the one comment is we should also be writing to our members of parliament.
Yes.
And I was heartened by Bill Blair on your session that he said it's important to do that. The previous Latvian ambassador to Canada also said that. Because sometimes I think, oh, they really want to get all this mail. But which is great, but we still should be writing to the MPs. But then my question is, I listened to a UCC Niagara session on Ukraine on, I think it was Tuesday night. They had two Brock professors that spoke. And the first guy who spoke, I was so annoyed because he said, oh, a free Ukraine, that was just an aberration. And so my question to you is, you're all students at U of T in politics, you're taking history. What are you hearing from your professors? And, how do you how do you go against these opinions that, from someone who's got his PhD and sounds so smart, but at the same time doesn't understand the reality?
From my politics professors, radio silence, to be honest, radio silence. The Ukrainian Students Club had a few members, like I said, I think at the rally, if anybody was there this morning. Very unfortunate that only a few days after the invasion happened, there was some little assignment due, some kind of bibliography. And two of the members really needed an extension because of the war that is happening in their country. And the professor responded initially in his first email. He said, as you may know, which I'm sorry is very patronizing, as you may know, there are other humanitarian crises in the world and other armed conflicts. So if we give you guys an extension, we have to consider other students. That is horrific to say as a politics professor. Number one, this isn't an armed conflict or a humanitarian crisis. This is genocide. Russia is committing genocide, not only in the eastern parts of Ukraine, but in any other city that they are, surrounding or controlling. Number two, why would you not consider other students who have experienced war, whose families are in war zones? Why would you not consider them for compassion? Why would you not give them an extension for an assignment, which I'm sorry is literally the last thing on my mind at any given point in this war, in this genocide? So that was a really, really unfortunate experience in the politics department, but in any other department, I've experienced nothing but compassion, and just like some professors have gone above and beyond. I really want to share that my religion professor, she heard about, my story. I told her after class, I just wanted to let her know after class that, I might be kind of discombobulated mentally, so I don't know if I'll really be able to hand everything in on time, just letting you know. And I got very emotional, and she sat down with me among, there were probably like 50 other students in the class who wanted to ask a question. They just kind of went to the side. And she sat down with me and she asked me, what my family is going through. And I told her that one of our cousins, he doesn't know where to go. He just crossed the border into Poland. He's a minor, so he needs help. He wants to get to Canada. And she gave me her one of her friends' information. She's some kind of, I think, immigration consultant. And she said, please, my friend will talk to you, like no charge, just email her, I'll give you her information. Don't worry about assignments, like hand it in when you can, I'll give you like a week for all of them. It's things like that in our institution that gives me hope, but I know of course there are a lot of other experiences that are not as pleasant, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, Marta's case was really the most interesting one. I mean, my history professor, he's a NATO specialist, so he came forward and he was very he actually wants to partake in maybe another panel discussion with our organization sometime, which I think would be really interesting. But all my other professors have basically not mentioned it, or if they've had to mention it, they've just said that it's unfortunate what's happening, or they find the conflict in Ukraine unfortunate, which I think is like the gentlest touch of the situation they could ever have thought up in their head. So hopefully at some point they'll bring it up. But I'd like to add that the three of us, to every lecture, we've been wearing traditional Ukrainian clothes. Marta has a Ukrainian flag sewed onto her backpack. We've tried to spread our Ukrainianness as much as possible whenever we go around.
Yeah, I have a lot of classes in common with both Marta and Alex, so my experience is similar to theirs. Something I just like to add on, though, which I think was really nice, is one tutorial that Marta and I share, where our TA was very supportive and gave us a space for about maybe 10-15 minutes to really explain the context of what was going on, and for a lot of people who probably the most they heard was, a war is going on or an invasion occurred, and that really is all the exposure they've had. Which I think was really, really nice, and really is uplifting to know that there are people that are willing and able to do that.
So I know we've already had some questions from the audience, but I'd like to maybe transition to that part more formally. If you have any questions, please just come up here and maybe take the mic so the people on Zoom can hear as well. But really, I just think we all have so much to learn, and I'm sure we all have many thoughts. So does anyone want to take a first stab?
Maybe we have some virtual questions.
Yeah, there could be virtual questions. Leva, can you keep an eye on the Zoom? Is your hand up?
So my question is one step further. You guys are talking about your courses specifically. Do you think an institution like U of T is doing their job properly, or should they be doing more to support Ukrainians?
I think in literally any situation, U of T is never doing enough, or literally the bare minimum, if even that. There's horror stories of U of T's lack of compassion, support, awareness, like sensitivity. These professors should go through sensitivity training, because I don't know if these professors have tenure at U of T, but they act like they will never get fired and they are invincible. So, aside from like specific courses and, very, very lucky experiences with professors, U of T as an institution, no, definitely not. I think I've heard, I don't know if Alex or Nick can elaborate, but I remember our club got a message from one of the students at UTM, the U of T Mississauga campus. She's a Ukrainian student, and it was either from a department or from UTM specifically, talking about support for Russian students, and they had said nothing about Ukrainian students to that point, which, if Russian students need support, they should be able to access it, because, they are also affected. But to say that before the country that is experiencing war, an invasion, and genocide, that is like beyond my understanding of insensitivity and like blatant disregard for, blatant disregard for everything. So it is not doing enough. It's barely scraping the bare minimum, so.
Yeah, no, to add on to that, I think U of T sent out a newsletter or something like that, that they'd be offering mental health support to all Ukrainian and Russian students, and that was kind of like the end of it, Not really much from that, and to kind of go on to the fact, I mean, I don't want to get into my views on Russia now, because some people would like to argue with me, but I don't really think now's the time to be running towards both Russians and Ukrainians and saying, oh wow, you're going through such a terrible conflict, the both of you, I think most, I don't know how other universities have handled this, but definitely U of T, as Marta said, a lot of the people in management there should go through some kind of sensitivity training, because they're way off. They
sent us a hotline number for mental health, and I thought, what the hell is this? Absolutely not.
It's the kids' helpline phone.
Yeah, it was kids' help phone. Yeah. And I thought, are these people, number one, equipped to deal with, an 18-year-old who's scared about war and conflict, of their country? Number two, I don't have time to call a hotline right now. It's not at the front of my mind. I'm thinking maybe I should call my family instead, who lives in Ukraine. We can deal with like these hotline issues later, these counseling issues, you know. If you haven't experienced the war, you should be giving your time to volunteering and, you know, taking care of yourself, of course, but there's things that need to be done right now, urgently, and a hotline is not going to solve the conflict in Ukraine right now. Thank you, U of T. So.
If I could quickly add on to that, you know, with our students group, we've been organizing, you know, trying to organize easy ways that people can donate money to Ukraine, donate medical supplies for Ukraine. And, you know, while some members of U of T have been more than helpful, I have to say, in general, the organization has done everything they possibly can to put sticks into the spokes of our wheels, you know, to kind of slow down our process. You know, at first there was this talk where, okay, you can collect money, but only for humanitarian causes. And then you can't collect money, you can only raise awareness. And then after that, there was something about not being able to put up posters unless every dean had approved them, and you can't put up posters on this board because they're only for the medical students, and blah, 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 blah. They've done everything that they could in their power to hinder our progress. Thankfully, you know, there have been some of the people who you know, have understood that, you know, it's madness, you know, that we've got to do something. So they've helped us. But in a general sense, it's been an upwards battle against them.
If I'd also like to add on a little bit, and this relates to a greater topic at hand as well, is that it seems that the university, as well as a lot of Western nations, really are hiding behind like semantics and hiding behind, you know, small little details that allow them to comfortably sit by. You know, the university, you know, like this, you know, some walls, you know, this is only for some kind of faculty postings, or there's some kind of, you know, little insignificant rules that if it were broken would impact nobody and help a lot. But, you know, they hide behind those rules and are really unhelpful. And as I said, I think it is quite reflective of how a lot of Western nations as well are dealing with this crisis, where they're happy that it's not happening to them yet, and that, you know, they have NATO, and they're okay, and they're not going to do that much, and they can't really help out.
Any other questions? There's a mic now behind, also easily accessible.
I want to make a comment just so people can hear on the line. So, you know, there's a common phrase that's been sort of circulating in these COVID times, that there's like nothing like a crisis to bring people together. And I just want to quickly reflect that in 2020, actually, the Belarusian freedom movement is actually what brought our youth associations together. We met at the Belarusian protest in City Hall. Like, obviously we've always been connected over the years, but we sort of lost touch in the last couple of years, and we reconnected. And I just want to make an open comment to everyone here that we're only as helpful as the strength of our foundation. And I think it's also a really important moment to really think about how we re-inspire, reinvigorate our friends, you know, to come out to these seminars, our friends to come out to events like SHME, you know, friends to come out to our Commemorance Day, our Independence Days, right? Like last night we celebrated Lithuania's restored independence, and I've never seen our hall filled with the numbers we had yesterday. We had members of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress show up there. And so I guess it's an open plea for us all to also like really think about how do we continue this strong, organized front, because things don't get done unless they're organized, quite frankly. And so I want us to kind of like reflect on that, and maybe you can chime in a bit about that too, frankly.
Well, I'd like to make a comment, not necessarily a response, but just something I'd like to add on, which I really liked the term that you used for describing Lithuania's independence, that it's a restored independence, that it's something that was taken away, and that now they've got it back. And that's something that I really would like to see entrenched in the narrative discussing Ukraine, is that Ukraine in 1991 renewed its independence, which was at first given in 1918, and which also reflects on the many years where Ukraine did have a self-functioning government, because saying that Ukraine has independence in 1991 really just makes it seem like this unstable post-Soviet republic that doesn't really give credence to what actually happened in the many hundreds of years before.
And you know, a funny thing that I was talking about with my parents recently, you know, it's a bit of a reverse effect. As much as, you know, everyone in my household, and I'm sure most people here, absolutely have no sympathy whatsoever for the Soviet Union and don't think about those as fond times whatsoever. The one thing the Soviet Union did is it did bring all of us little republics together. You know, it's kind of like a back door. There's Russia. We're over here. We're on the Western Front, and you know, we're doing our own thing now, but we were connected before, and we kind of, you know, have a compassion for each other. I was looking at the documentary, you know, the scenes that were there are a facsimile of the scenes that happened in 2014 in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. I mean, just exactly the same thing, you know, just in a different country, in a different time, but the actions are exactly the same. If you showed me that video and the person was speaking Ukrainian instead of Latvian or Lithuanian, I'd say, yeah, that's 2014 right there. It's the same thing. So, you know, we all have a shared history, and it's good that we stick together and that we move forward together.
Maybe we can ask for the last couple of questions, because I know we've been speaking for a while, but go ahead, Zoe, and then maybe someone else.
I just want to say, you guys are amazing. You
Thank
are
you.
so eloquent. I can't believe how young you are. Speaking as a professor, I mean, I was like, I want to go strangle those professors. It made you feel that way, because this is so, and just to say, when I was making my film, and to your comment about speaking out about being proud of who you are, I realized that when I was making my film, I was not getting support from the CBC, from the National Film Board. It was one woman at TV Ontario who stood behind me to help me make that film, to get it on air, because there was such a prevalence of that we are fascist countries. And this propaganda, I saw it in the 70s when I'd come back and I'd say, oh yeah, those little, you're fascist guys, those Soviet propaganda, even that BBC crew that gave me that camera, were skeptical about us. Well, I remember hearing them saying, oh, these little countries, what do they know about democracy? They're just a bunch of fascists. I heard that as I was filming my friend at the funeral, you know, who had given up his life for this. And he was married to a Russian woman. It was like, what, you guys, you have no idea what's going on here at all. So what Skylar said, what we should do is just make our voices as vocal as possible, speak to everybody, inform them, know our history, like the young man was giving us our history lesson in the beginning. CBC asked me for an interview, and I remember this was at CBC Morning Radio, and I thought, oh my God, they're going to nail me to the cross about this film. It was about Vita's film, actually, and because it was on CBC, and they wanted to know what, and they asked me, what are my politics? I said, he said, are you really a Canadian? I said, I was born in Canada. I speak of Lithuanian and Latvian heritage. I speak both languages, and right now I'm living in Quebec, and I love speaking French. And my friends came back to me and they said, yes, you completely nailed it, because he was trying to accuse me. So I think your voices are so fabulous, and thank you for doing this. This is amazing.
We'll have some final comments, and then we will truly wrap. But I do just want to, before I give you the last word, say thank you, like from the depths of my heart, and thank you from all of us. I think this was so incredibly meaningful, the time that you've given to be here today, despite everything that's happening. And it's just also really inspiring. Like, just like Zoe said, like, you three are truly incredible. Grateful that you're sharing your voices, your experience, your knowledge, and yeah, that's all I can say. Just thank you, and please, last words for each of you.
And just to say too, they're all 18.
I'd just like to say, thinking from my own thoughts, for every Latvian and Lithuanian here, please visit your country as much as possible. Because, you know, from my own perspective, you don't know how much you love something until you lose it, right? And that's really something that I think everybody should remember. Visit your country as much as possible, support your country as much as possible, and I think you'll feel the gratification within yourself.
I have just a funny little note to end on. Funny, but really sad and kind of horrifying all at the same time. I liked to ask my parents growing up about their experience in the Soviet Union. And they told me something that kind of made me laugh back then, but nowadays it's kind of making everything more urgent in my mind, more so than it already is. They told me about this story when they were in like a high school equivalent grade in Ukraine. There were, of course, mandatory military classes. Everything was laced, not even laced, it was literally just Russian propaganda and Soviet propaganda. And there was one thing, they of course had to learn how to put together guns and how to shoot them and things like that. There was one little competition in their grade of who can put together and take apart the AK-47 as fast as possible, and they had these like every single day at lunch. And I thought, this is really horrifying that every single generation of Ukraine, not only Ukraine, Eastern European countries, every single generation has a story to tell about the oppression that either the Soviet Union put upon them or some other empire that tried to suppress their culture and their identity. And I want to say that this is ending with our generation. I'm saying that with full conviction. This is ending with our generation. This is going to be the last story that is told of this kind of garbage that is happening to our countries. I want to see our kids and their children live in a free Ukraine, free Lithuania, free Latvia, free Estonia, every other country, free Belarus, free Poland, free everyone from these shackles, please. Thank you.
Well, first I'd like to start off, thank you all for thanking us, but really an equally great thanks needs to go to all of you, to LNJAK, to Liva for having us here. I mean, it's such an important part of the discourse to have all of us together here, so I'm sure that all three of us will join in thanking all of you for that. Дякую, дуже дякую, so thank you very much. My own commentary, just similar to what Marta said, is that we can't forget that history repeats itself. I'd shudder to think my grandmother passed away 2 years ago or so, and if she was here and saw the footage of the families crossing from Ukraine into Poland with gunfire and missiles, that she would be completely heartbroken, because she did the exact same thing at 9 years old in the 1930s. So just knowing that history repeats itself, and we need to fight to make sure that it doesn't, because the only way that it doesn't is if we learn about it, recognize it, and then act upon it.
Thank you. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!
All right, so that's the end of our official part today. We will take a group photo, but I have to give the votes to Daria because Northern Birch supported us and they have a raffle and we forgot to do it earlier. So are there any questions online? Yes, we can turn off this Zoom call. Thank you to everyone joining us virtually. Daria,